Today on Cityline, from nuclear politics to North Korea to a comic exploration of a wacky fictional town in California. Our discussion today is all connected somehow, you'll see, to Korea. Hello everyone, welcome to Cityline. Today our program has a Korean theme. We're going to hear the story of a ginseng hunter living along the border between North Korea and China. And we're also going to enjoy a very wild comic ride with a Korean-American novelist with lots to say about multiculturalism, fame, and fractured family bonds. But first we're going to tackle the hard news a bit. This month, two Korean presidents visited the United States, two men with very different messages about dealing with North Korea. Former President Kim Dae Jung won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2000 for his doctrine of peaceful cooperation with North Korea. It was called the Sunshine Policy. He was in Boston this past week, and newly inaugurated President Lee Myung Bak is popularly characterized as a bulldozer for his tough, no-holds-barred political gamesmanship. Joining us to talk about this is Katharine Moon. She is professor of political science at Wellesley College, and she is also an associate fellow at the Asia Society in New York. How are you today, Katharine?
Fine, thank you, Karen.
Now let's kind of set the stage for our audience just so that everybody's clear what this means. Kim Dae Jung was president of South Korea from 1998 to 2003, and Lee Myung Bak came to office just this past year. And it's really a coincidence that they came to the U.S. right around the same time. But their trips mean quite a lot to people who follow Korean politics and the situation in North Korea. President Lee visited President Bush at the White House, traveled to New York, and former President Kim came to Boston, speaking at Harvard and Tufts. What do the visits of these two men mean to people who are following this situation?
Well, in some ways, it's a very strange coincidence because the two presidents, one former president and the current president, President Lee, they have two different types of messages regarding South Korea's relationship with North Korea and the South's relationship with the United States. What's really interesting from my perspective is the way that President Lee has been received by President Bush this time, in contrast to the way that President Kim Dae Jung had been received by President Bush when President Kim had been in power. As many people might have already noticed, President Lee was invited to Camp David, a first ever for a South Korean president, and a real privilege and honor. It signifies a certain kind of friendship and a closeness that had been lacking in the South Korean-U.S. relationship for the last 10 years or so. By contrast, when President Kim had visited earlier in this decade, President Bush had not received President Kim very well, and so the South Korean delegation and the South Korean people had felt quite slighted. So it's a very interesting contrast, but the two presidents' messages are also different. I think President Kim, he was invited also to Portland, Oregon, to be honored there on several occasions this time. I think President Kim is here this time trying to shore up a certain kind of legacy for himself regarding the Sunshine Policy that he had initiated back in the late 1990s, and which President Bush and his first administration had severely criticized. President Lee, on the other hand, having just come into office in South Korea, has made it very clear, both to the South Korean people and to the North Korean government, as well as the United States, that the U.S.-Korea relationship will be at the forefront of South Korea's foreign policy, that the denuclearization of the North will be one of the top priorities for his administration, and that the inter-Korean cooperation will take a bit of a backseat to the denuclearization efforts. That's a big contrast to the last 10 years.
And you talk a little bit about the styles of the current president and the past president. I think President Kim's style under the Sunshine Policy has kind of been described as a peaceful negotiation, Clinton-style of politics versus President Lee's more conservative Bush-style negotiations. Now, how is that going to translate into what's currently going on in Korea and the whole process of trying to denuclearize the region?
Well, I think in some ways, President Lee, we don't know what his style is or will be yet because it's too new. He's too new as a leader, and he's still getting familiar with the players. And it's interesting that he went to Japan right after his trip to the United States to, again, strengthen that relationship in East Asia. I think what's interesting is that in some ways, President Lee's modification of the relationship with the North, meaning taking a bit more tougher line than the last two presidents had done, it is necessary because South Koreans as a state have tended to give the North Koreans quite a bit of a break in the last 10 years with the hope that the sunshine will continue to warm up the relationship. And the North Koreans have been playing that game, but they haven't been very forthcoming with explicit changes. I think what President Lee is trying to do is put a little bit more teeth into the sunshine policy so that there will be benchmarks and some standards that that the government will have to meet. But I don't think President Lee is going to do a complete reverse course from the last 10 years, partly because the South Korean people do not want to see a reverse course, and also the regional conditions in East Asia won't really allow for a reversal of the sunshine policy. China, Russia, South Korea, the United States, Japan to some extent, but less so, would like to see an opening toward the North.
And speaking more about President Lee's style, he was the former mayor of Seoul and responsible for one of the most successful and popular redevelopments of downtown. But along the way, he picked up the nickname the bulldozer, which many people have used as an adjective to describe his political style. How did he get that nickname, and is it going to translate into his governing process?
It's a curious nickname. I think it's partly an identity he gave himself, but also partly the way that he goes about. He was also a CEO of a major conglomerate, and so he has a lot of experience in varied circles in South Korean society and politics. But I think he is the type of person who believes that his own willpower and his hard work will get things done. And that's something that resonates very much with the South Korean public. On the other hand, I think what's interesting is that South Korean people, the civil society, is also a bulldozing civil society. They're not pansies. They won't sit there and just let the leader take over because this is a flourishing democracy. So I think this bulldozer tendency of Mr. Lee, the new president, he will have to figure out how to moderate perhaps the engine of the bulldozer as he gets to know better the demands and the interests of the South Korean public. And also, he has to deal with the regional leaders and the political conditions there. He won't be able to just simply get his way.
All right, this has been great and very informative for helping to give us an overview of what's been going on in Korean politics. Thank you very much, Professor Moon.
Thank you very much.
Now, for more information about Professor Katharine Moon, see the link at the bottom of the screen. We're also going to list it on our homepage at thebostonchannel.com. Up next, he made a literary splash with his first novel, The Pearl Diver. His second novel, The Ginseng Hunter, takes us inside the world of North Korean refugees who escaped their homeland to China.